Hello, hello. Hi to everyone at the Music Market here in Collingwood and to all the people joining us online. My name's Dale Packard. I'm the General Manager of Music Victoria, and welcome to today's VMDO Link session, What's Metadata Got to Do with Me? We're here on beautiful Wurundjeri country, and my respects to their elders and the Wurundjeri community. Today we'll be diving into metadata, including how metadata relates to making money from your music and things like understanding the difference between a publisher, a distributor, an aggregator, and a digital service provider. For those online, if you have questions throughout the session, feel free to add them into the chat and I'll be reading out your questions live in the room towards the end. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests who all have metadata expertise to offer. From Invoke Network, we have Marida Sussex. From RMIT in University, we have Professor Ellie Rennie. Over the pandemic, Ellie and Marida have interviewed artists, labels, publishers and managers all over the world about their processes of creating and communicating metadata. Ellie and Marida will discuss some of their findings and some of the practical tools and practices people can do to ensure that their metadata is accurate and complete. They will also be joined by one of the artists they interviewed, the one and only Enfer Forster-Jones. So please welcome Marida Sussex, Ellie Rennie and Enfer Forster-Jones.
Thank you. Right, well, thanks all for coming and thank you very much, VMDO, for hosting this event. We're going to talk about what's metadata got to do with me. So firstly, what is metadata? Well, it just means data about data, like metaphysical. And in this case, it's about music. So it roughly falls into three categories, but really it's about identifying your musical works so that you know that it's your works and how you can be paid for your works, identifying you and your works. So firstly, descriptive, that's like the title and the artist and the artwork. Then ownership and performing rights, and they're two separate things. Like on one side, it's the composition and the lyrics, and on the other side, who performs the song. So they could be the same person or different people. The guitarist could play a song that someone else wrote, for example. And that's composer, lyrics, and performer, and that's how you get paid, so very important in there. And then recommendation, and that's grown in strength more recently. And consequently means metadata is more valued because it's about playlists and algorithms and genres. So a manager these days is more aware of what tags a song is done by. So you can, if you've listened to one type of artist, you might listen to another type of artist so that it can make those recommendations. So it's interesting that metadata has become more valued sort of in its deeper end, but they're the three different types of metadata. So all very important, but the problem is they are often inaccurate and incomplete, and that's the unattributable revenue problem, which is quite sort of a bizarre sort of problem, but we'll get into that. So why metadata matters to me? I started my music life as an artist in the Paradise Motel, and I knew what it was like to be a priority on a label, like to be flown around. We toured a lot, but I didn't know what my back end was like how the music industry worked. I didn't know how that data was collected, and I felt like often a question was too stupid to ask. Like I really should know at this stage of being like a profile sort of artist what was going on with my career. But I never really knew how to ask that question. So that was my start in metadata. We moved to the UK with the band, and after we split up, I started a record label and publishing company with two friends. But from an artist perspective, we always had an artist perspective to how we ran the label. And that means I was meticulous about my metadata so that the artists were empowered to collect the money owed to them. And also when I reverted the master rights, when the license would end, I would make sure to revert the data as well. that it was equally important to the artist to have their data, their analytics, their fan engagement, but also what's an ISRC? You know, how do you keep your playlist position? All that sort of advice I would hand over. So this drive for good metadata led me to be on some boards in AIM in the UK, and then recently the Merlin board representing Australia. It's always been my perspective. And then to start Invoke Network about 4 years ago, Peter Harris and I think he's listening in from Berlin, he's my business partner, we started working on a way to fix metadata. You know, in the music industry, we had big plans, but we wanted to involve everyone in that process, like people from the music industry, tech developers, educators, academic researchers like Ellie. But we didn't want to be like tech solutionism, like here's the perfect thing, this is what you have to do. We wanted to find out how people work with metadata. So we set out on this 2-year process of research. We interviewed, firstly, everyone we knew around the world, all the record labels, publishers, managers, artists, including ENFA, to try and find out how do people do it? Like, how does it work? And we got some funding from the Australia Council, Reimagine Industry Fund, and also some from VMDO. We're now part of the Department of International Trade Global Entrepreneur Program and Australia Research Council cooperation through Code with Ellie. And also the Intellectual Property Office, we feed through our research into their metadata working group. So it's been an amazing experience. These are some of the people we work with. Hu Jong Sun at the University of York and Marcus at UAL. These music associations too, and some tech advisors. And then these labels. So these are some of the labels we've interviewed and some of the organizations we're involved with. And it's been fascinating. Like, I thought I knew my industry, but I found out so much about how people work, like how people are innovative with metadata, and some of the causes of the unattributable revenue issue. So that brings us to today to talk about some of the things we've found.
Thank you, Marida. Come and join us on the couch. Yeah, so I'm Ellie, and I'm a professor at RMIT University. I study the intersection of practices and technologies, and for the last few years, going deep into what we call Web3, including blockchain-based technologies, which is how Marida and I got talking about some of these questions around metadata, because there'd been a number of proposed solutions, but they didn't seem to be going anywhere. And because I'm an ethnographer, which means that I study people, and but also people in relation to automated systems, I decided to just tag along with Marida on her entrepreneurial discovery, and we set out to do these interviews. So she's the real expert here. I have learnt a lot about the music industry from her, and you will soon too. Enfa.
Hi, my name is Enfa. I'm an MC, I guess, traditionally. I've been in music performance and songwriting, and even, I guess, putting songs down for like opera splits since I was a teenager, really. I moved to Melbourne when I was 17, straight out of high school. I had pretty green and didn't know much. Had some good times. I've spent maybe a week homeless, walking up and down Brunswick Street, but I had a place I could crash in the day, so I just walk around at night. Was fascinated by venues, and being offered a chance to get up and play with bands was a place to feel welcome. So it's always been a part of this sort of creative community that I felt at home. I've continued on through with 1200 Techniques. We did some pretty good things. We won a couple ARIA awards before there was any urban categories. So we were navigating very blindly and unsure in a very rock-centric culture, which was confusing for us. You kind of get stuck between the am I supposed to act that way or create a new way? But when you're a young person, you're not really sure what you are, really. I wasn't. But I liked writing songs and performing, and the blessings of music has allowed me to enter a lot of amazing rooms and meet amazing people. I don't know if if my older brother Kabar hadn't got me interested in emceeing and writing songs, I think my life would have been very dull and uninteresting. I mean, and this journey through music has brought me, I get to hang out with these amazing people and yourselves. And I have had an interesting, tumultuous, up and down experience, especially when it comes to metadata and the process and processes. And I think something a lot of artists might struggle with is the value of self and the right to take what they do as valuable instead of feeling that sense of, oh, it's just a thing, whatever, I'm an artist, I don't care about that, and actually put respect into their work and allow it to grow into something that actually gives them something back. And I'm on a journey to continue to develop that and help pay it forward.
I actually feel slightly guilty because I think you probably have all these amazing stories and career highlights that we could be talking about, and I'm going to ask you about your metadata process.
But I'm telling you, let me say something. If my metadata had been better, I'd be wearing shiny shoes. Okay?
So how do you do it? For instance, if you're writing a song, what is the process? Before we get into all the complexities of metadata and platforms, just like what is it for you? What does it mean? What do you do?
Yeah, it's changed over the years. When I was younger, there was very much a sense of who's made the most effort kind of thing. And it was kind of annoying because I maybe wrote an entire song, and maybe I happened to write a song in 20 minutes, but someone else would be working on production and someone else on something, so they'd be like, yeah, your thing was quick, it doesn't count as much as ours. So my APRA percentage wouldn't be 50, which it should be, because I wrote the whole song, you know what I mean? But I didn't understand that stuff, and they didn't understand it. They didn't understand that there was more emotional attachment than actual work attachment. And over time, I started just working with, with just like a beat producer, and we would just split things. But then I start finding out, well, if you're writing melodies, that's music, so really you should be cutting into that, but then there's an uncomfortableness with it. So it's an interesting one because there's a lot of discomfort around that versus working with people. I was working with a guy called, well, it's almost embarrassing to say, but I was working with a guy called Jimmy Napes. He's one of the biggest producers in the UK. He's produced all of Sam Smith's music, all that stuff. We were hanging out heaps. And I just watched how he looked at business before he blew up and how he saw splits and percentages. And it was very, this is this is that. And I found that quite inspiring that he was comfortable with that. And so over the years, I've sort of led to, all right, if I'm the main writer and someone else is the main beat maker or sonic producer, and if I'm not even touching on that, we start half and half. That's just how we work if we have a good relationship. And then depending on what else comes in, we start working out what we split back from that.
Yep.
That's generally how I will look at splits. I'm quite generous. I prefer everybody to feel comfortable than to feel, there's a lot of feel versus just straight math lines.
Yeah.
Which, some people are really good with the straight math lines to the point where it's almost cold and it doesn't seem right. But, you hear of a good band like Coldplay who split everything 4 ways. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know about that. But when he explains his reasons, I'm like, okay, that is cool. I always thought it should have been like 20, 20, 20, 40.
And at what point are you sitting down? At what point are you sitting down in front of a computer and typing in the name of the song?
Oh.
And
I don't mind doing that, but I always forget my APRA login. I have to look it up. Where's the email? Most of us are pretty bad with that, to be honest. There are some musicians and songwriters who are awesome with that. I have a friend in the UK. She's an amazing songwriter, Michelle Escoffrey. And as she's leaving the studio, she's already registering things, she was very successful in her day and still doing good things now. But she's literally on her way out going, hey, guys, so I'm just registering this. Here's my split so we don't forget. Which I heard that and went, oh, wow, that fast. So the sitting down is fine. We kind of have a feeling. If someone guesses, I'll be like, hey, I'm thinking this. Are you cool with that? Mm-hmm. I've definitely given too much away before. I've never taken too much. I've always taken too little, to be honest.
Yeah.
But we try to keep it even and fair. Like if someone's added a verse, it's that thing, well, it's probably worth this. What if they've added a hook? It's probably more, you know. So it just depends on the impact of the part. Sometimes someone could write a single word thing that becomes the main part of the song. So you can't cut it down to a single word now, you know. So songwriting versus how the songs finish is a different thing. But the sitting down, you know, you wrote it in, you put a percentage. I tell everybody this is what I'm doing, hope that's cool. And sometimes, you know, you get a text from someone saying they want this or they want that. And then it's not really kept in a nice spreadsheet. Like if I want to know any of my splits, I'd have to sign into APRA and look. I wouldn't know.
Well, now you're talking our language, spreadsheets. Awesome.
I don't want to know about a spreadsheet. I'm still getting comfortable with Excel.
Yeah?
So
Okay. Well, Marida, why does it matter? And what are the kinds of systems we're talking about here? And what happens with this information?
Well, it's funny. So from the artist perspective, I really recognize some of the things you're saying. Like, I felt when I was trying to understand how to register my works, it felt so important to me. Like, it was so important that it was too hard to do. But then I wasn't really helped by the industry side, like making it seem easier or simpler. Like it was, oh, don't worry, like it's not artistic to want to know about your business side. You know, you just get along. Like for ages, I thought I was just patronized because I was female, but I think I was patronized because I was an artist as well. But then coming from the record label side, it's like just best to get those conversations out the front. Like, so your friend who does do that business side, it's like, if you can have that money ticking through with your streaming, then it can be paying for your like rehearsal studio more immediately. I think sometimes as well, because it's such long gaps before you get paid, it doesn't seem as real. But there's no need for that. Like it's digital, it should be faster. But trying to understand metadata, like I would always try and like draw pictures, like in our presentations, like trying to map out the complexities of the music industry, even trying to explain it to my parents, because it sounds like you've made it up half the time. Like it's so. But what we're talking about in that development area, that's when it all happens. That's when all those decisions are made. From demos, composition, that's when you're collaborating. That's when you change instrumentation. The band might change the lyrics. But as far as the industry is concerned, metadata doesn't start till the commercial recording point. That's when metadata starts to be registered. But the idea from the song to the commercial recording could be like a few hours, a few days, a few years. So then you have to go back to all these people who are involved and ask them those questions, like who was in the room, who wrote that top line part, like, and that's where the sort of problems come, because unless you add up to 100% that it's in conflict, and that means it's unattributable, and that means you're not getting paid. Like, so yeah, this metadata starts commercialization, but then the inaccurate metadata drifts off. Like, so that's when, you know, like one thing that causes a clash is that America has got Guam included or America doesn't. That just seems like a silly thing, but that means it's a clash, so the money gets stuck and doesn't get paid through. But there's all sorts of things that can cause inaccurate or incomplete metadata. And yeah, that's the unattributable revenue.
And what does that all amount to? Like, what are we talking about here in terms of loss of revenue?
Well, so it's actually a ridiculously massive problem. So last year, the music industry made about $26 billion, and 100,000 tracks are uploaded every day now on Spotify each day. I mean, not just Spotify, across all of them. And they estimate 2.5 billion doesn't get through to artists. So it just stays in digital service providers and collection societies because they don't know who to pay because of inaccurate or incomplete metadata. But that's just an estimate. So recently it got measured and it was nearly $500 million only in the DSPs and only in America and only in 2020. So it's probably...
DSPs is digital service providers.
Oh, yeah, sorry, like Spotify.
So, yeah,
sorry.
like Spotify platforms.
Yeah, and it mostly historically impacts the independent sector because historically, like, that's the most fragmented and the most least able to manage metadata. But that's nearly 32% market share and the fastest growing. So it's a big problem, which, you know, we're trying to resolve by finding out what processes people use and trying to work with what values and motivations they have about metadata to make it user-friendly, like, and rewarding for artists to use.
Yeah, I used to see it as I'm thinking back to being younger, but we used to have the handwritten forms, and you'd write it all in, and then you'd post it, and you'd wait and see and hope. Now it's a lot more digital and straightforward. It's a lot easier, but I was talking with Sensible J about this, and he was saying, you know, often we just sort of send a thing to our manager, and then they send it off. So a lot of artists actually aren't hands-on in the process. I think if 1200 Techniques hadn't got connected with Rubber Records, which is an independent label, with David Vodica at the time, I don't even know if I would have been on top of all that. But it was like, hey, have you done this and this? So I've always been on top of it, but I notice a lot of artists, especially a lot of young rappers, they have no idea what's going on to do with it. And I try to tell them, and they just feel like it's this alien thing that's not part of music.
Well, especially with those 100,000 tracks, like there's no barrier to globally release your music anymore. You can just put it up through aggregators immediately, like 17 and 18-year-olds, with no real understanding of what metadata has just been attributed to your track. Like, what's an ISRC? There isn't a receipt when you give that music out. Like, you can maybe look it up in your accounts, I'm assuming. But I know when I was putting together a compilation, some artists would say, yeah, it's already been released. So I'd say, what's the ISRC? And they didn't know what it was, because it's just straight through aggregators onto global release, but with no real understanding of what rights that's been assigned.
But there's also a bit of a history to all of this, isn't there, in terms of how rights themselves have developed over time. You know, I'm a bit of a nerd. I don't mind looking at data for hours and hours, and yet I try and get my head around these different codes that are, you know, some of them relate to the songwriter and some of them relate to the performance, et cetera, et cetera. So do you want to kind of talk a little bit about why it's so hard and how we've come to be in this situation?
Yeah, I think actually it's like deliberately made complex as well. I think that's the other part of it. But why it's become more complex. So it used to be a bit more straightforward. Like, you had a vinyl record, it got sold, you got the money for it. But now streaming is much more sort of diverse. But the processes are still really analog. Like, you're texting someone for approval. There are still collection societies that you do write things by hand. So there's all sorts of error in handwriting. Like, there's not correct names. There's like not automated authentication.
And numbers not adding up.
And numbers not adding up, which immediately means it's unattributable, so it's part of the 2.5 billion. I mean, you think about normal things in your life, like how you have to verify something or put in a code or verify your identity. Like, there's lots of mechanisms in our life digitally that could mean that, like, your identity is authenticated for a start when you release a song, so you know it's getting paid directly to you, directly to account that you own. But it's just, there are a lot of processes and a lot of siloed processes, because the other thing is, if you're the beneficiary of the unattributable revenue, 2.5 billion, like, what's your motivation for fixing that problem, which is partly. But yeah, there's also this unknown value in the music industry that's lost, because if people don't know who owns the song, how do they license it for the TV or the advertising, you know, or the game? Like, because there's no mechanism to get approval from there.
Did you want to add to that?
Yeah, and then it goes another layer beyond that, where I never understood anything about really about performance on recording. So it's like, okay, I've done my APRA, I'm a writer, and then there's this performance element as well. So, hey, you need to register with PPCA for these reasons, make sure that's registered, that's done. it's becoming, to me, it's becoming common knowledge now, but I think for a lot of people still. So there's all these performances happening, and that money, I understand, if, let's say a song does well, there's this performance amount that happens as a performer, and if that performer isn't registered, it just goes to whatever label released it. Yeah. And that money, so Ellie puts out a song, she's written it, I'm singing on it, that performance money will not go to Ellie or go to wherever. And so I'm not taking Ellie's money if I register my part. But it's just a quiet, silent thing. Oh, it's not much, just now I forget about it. But it's something,
Yeah, what was interesting about, because the research was global, there's loads of different approaches in different countries, and some countries, the artists will, without question, be registered to both societies, as a songwriter and as a performer, because it's two types of money, it's two sides of it. It's called the master rights and the synchronization rights. They're two completely different rights. But that's not the case in some other countries. It's not inherent that as an artist you belong to both those societies. Quite a lot of artists we interviewed only belong to one, just because it was easier to deal with than the other one. But yeah, so that's it. It's a whole pot of money that just sits there.
And a lot of the time, if, let's say, you've what they call the neighbouring rights, a lot of the time with that, the bands who might do something and put it out don't know they're doing some harm to somebody accidentally, where the neighbouring rights is, well, you performed on it, let's make sure your name's there, so even though you didn't write, you can get that performance if the song takes off. People don't know they're making these mistakes half the time.
Yeah.
Which leads to a lot of begrudged people.
Yeah, you've left off the trumpet player who, and all of a sudden a song's massive.
Just even as a performer.
But all that information's available. It's just not centralized or easy to access sometimes, or at the source of it.
Yeah, well, Sensible J was saying when we talked, he was saying it's crazy that people can release songs without having to go through these processes of making sure everything's done, that they can just go there, it's out. He's like, it seems ridiculous that artists can do it and don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, the UK has just had a 2-year streaming inquiry looking into those, like a government House of Commons inquiry looking into those kind of issues, to try and make some kind of standard, because that's exactly right. We haven't even really got to the ISWC part, which is the song part, because you can just release a song on the digital service providers without having the actual song registered. You just have the master registered, and a very few percentage of songs have the ISWC registered when they get globally released. But that's what they're trying to legislate on in the UK now, not legislate.
So explain the consequence of that if your ISWC is not registered.
Well, it means on the publishing side, the composer side, then you don't get paid. I thought record labels metadata was in a bad way, and then I spoke to publishers, and it's just even worse, because a publisher doesn't have oversight when the song is released. So the publisher, this is me again trying to draw the music industry. The musical composition, the publisher's on the left and the record label's on the right. So the record label can release the track with what they think they've got, but not put the performer down. So they'll get the money, but the performer might not get the money. But on the musical composition side, the publisher has no oversight on what gets released from the DSP, the digital service provider. They're not even connected. It's so the ISWC is what comes out of the publisher, and the ISRC for recording is what comes out of the record label. But these two things diverge, and over years, a record label might not ever even talk to the publisher. So you can't even, as an outside person trying to license that track, you can't get both rights. So that stalls up. That's the unknown loss of revenue, let alone the unattributable loss of revenue.
Can I ask a question? So what if an artist isn't published and is just releasing themselves and they doing things correctly, but what happens in that case? Are they the publisher? How they register and get their ISWC.
Well, if that's their copyright control, once they can join like a publishing organization and back collect it. So if it's not collected yet, that still sits there and you can still collect it. But yeah, it just needs to be registered at the time.
Yeah, cool.
But yeah, it is complicated.
It is complicated, and one thing that came through in the interviews that we did was there's a huge difference between, say, how a small label might handle this stuff and a bigger one, or one that just has better systems or has implemented some bespoke software in order to be able to deal with it all. So it can also just come down to the capabilities and the capacities of the people at a label, or the managers or the publishers or whomever it is, and the systems that they're using, because they don't talk to each other, right? They're all using different systems.
Yeah, they're not interoperable, which is the main thing. Like they are siloed and separate. I mean, the funny thing is about like technological capabilities in a record label. It's really true that like a more resourced record label will have amazing systems, but it's actually from all the conversations we had, it's so much more about the approach, and it's the top-down approach. Like if the person at the top of the record label has an innovative approach to metadata, like they see their metadata as the absolute backbone of value of their organization, and it intersects with every single level.
Marketing, like, everything, yeah.
Yeah, royalty, contracts, like smart contracts, the opportunity of technology, like reconciliations. If they see it as like this agile thing that saves them time, money, and risk, because they're looking after their intellectual property, then that travels all through their company, and they have great systems. Whereas ones who still see it as like data entry, you know, it's set in concrete.
Work experience kids doing it.
Yeah, because I've seen absolutely horrendous metadata. And it's so important to the artist, and the artist had nothing to do with its input. So it's totally wrong, and then sometimes uncollectible. And that's really sad.
So why has no one solved this? And what attempts have there been to solve it?
Well, part of before we started this, we did research all the attempts. Like, so there's been a few different attempts at solving. Like, this isn't completely comprehensive, and it needs updating because there's a few recently. But yeah, there was that amazing one in 1998 that I don't know anything about really, that apparently represented 21% of the world's music at one point, that could have changed so many things. There was the Global Repertoire Database. I was on the AIM board when that got funded, and I was really excited about that. But that failed at a cost of 13.7 million. And off the record, like, you know, you can find easily on the internet, people say it's because beneficiaries of the unattributable revenue didn't want to solve the problem. And then there's us. And then there's a great one going on in Japan that's, but is just Japanese language so far, but is meticulous, and it has 9.5 million tracks last time I spoke to them. And then there's ones that are competitive with each other, which immediately aren't going to work, because you have to be collaborative, you have to be globally collaborative. And then there's other ones that were tech solutionist, like, this is the perfect way to do things, you have to do it this way, it's not how the music industry works, or this is the record label one, which means you have great processes in your record label, but the major labels are very competitive with each other. So if it's the Warner's one, then Sony and Universal won't usually get involved. I shouldn't say all this. But then the RDX one's great down the bottom. Like, it's really fixed with DDEX, like, because DDEX is a fixed format. But that's between collection societies. But anything that improves things, because that's the thing, that's what we sort of came out with. It's not something that can be just fixed with one thing. It has, like, many aspects to it that everyone sort of needs to work on together, you know. But not thinking it's just like straight up and down, because it's not.
Yeah. So what is the I mean, what would you do? What are some of the things that we need? Because it's not one solution, but what could we do?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's loads of initiatives, because one of the really great things is that I think generally the industry is starting to think, oh, rather than me thinking the pie is this big and I get unattributable revenue from the pie, because after however many years, sometimes up to 7, the unattributable revenue is paid back into the industry, but by market share, so it goes to the majors. So that was partly why they thought it didn't really want to get fixed. But instead of just thinking, oh, why do I want to fix this, I think there's starting to be a shift at thinking, actually, if we grew the pie and were efficient, then we'd all have a bigger slice of a better pie, like instead of being paid twice. That was one of the quotes from the UK Streaming Inquiry. Effectively, people get paid twice. So there's all these different things going on, like the IPOs trying to bring proper standards. So ISWCs have to be submitted when you release music, so people get paid that way. PRS just brought out a new portal. MLC, the ones who measured the $500 million, they've just brought a matching software out, so you can track. It's the education piece, the industry change that I just mentioned, and this evolving understanding of metadata. So managers now push back on metadata to make sure it's complete, because it's informing playlists and algorithms. And yet artist empowerment and awareness, I guess that's where we've landed, because initially we tried to fix the whole thing, and actually we've just focused on artists now, because people value metadata in different ways. It's like, how does the artist, what's fun for the artist? One of the questions we had here, it's like artists will go, it's a never-ending anti-rewarding horizontal scroll of doom for metadata. And then the record label will say things like, how do you get an artist to fill out metadata? Artists, But the artist would go, well, what's metadata got to do with me? And it felt like, how can you reconnect the artist with their works? Because that's a thing. And I think of my friends who are painters, it's the dimensions of the paint, the canvas you're working on, what paints you're using. That's part of the pride of the artwork, its descriptors. How can you re-engage an artist to think that their metadata, of course they're proud of their work, but their metadata is how they get paid, and more immediately. And, because we should be able to do that with the nature of, digital payments and digital streaming.
How do we make you love your metadata more, Infa?
Well, you put it together, as you're saying about the artists, visual artists. If someone came to me as a visual artist and said, hey, we want to do, I don't know, represent your artwork and sell prints of it, you go, okay, cool. But it would seem simple to have a number for your artwork as the visual artist, and if there was anyone else who inputted on it, and they would have a percentage of it and so on. It's really the same thing with music, but somehow with music, like I said, so many more people involved, it gets complicated. And then, let's face it, a lot of musicians aren't exactly your most stable, organized, well-considered people. They're just creatives, and they do. So the process of getting them to really understand that, I don't know if you can get them to. I think it has to just be made easier.
Yeah, I remember when we spoke to you and Sensible J, you two were so great at this.
I struggle a little, and I'm pretty on point.
Yeah.
I got friends who are far less on point than me, and if I struggle a little, how are they going to do?
But what you were saying was great. You were like, well, it needs some color, and you need this flashing thing if I have to do this thing. And when I put it on Instagram, can you tell it to tell me to do the other thing, and then I get paid? Or can I have some coins appear? Or what if I just get paid tomorrow? That would mean I'd fix it. So it's those things that are actually possible. There's quite a few companies now where you can advance your earnings based on what you've earned previously. There's a few companies around the world that do that for music, because digital earnings are actually amazingly solid. Our UK record label, we earn a growing amount each month from digital, because just more and more people sign up to streaming services, so just more people listen. So it's not even, we haven't even done anything. So it's quite strangely solid for something that you think seems sort of flimsy. It's actually much more solid than physical because you don't have to repress. So if you can advance money to reward people for like registering something, but if you can make it easy for them to register it, like even the other day I saw this startup that takes attendance by taking a photo. Like, so if we're in the studio and you're all playing and the camera goes click, so you know who's in the studio, so you just do that with your phone. Like, and then you go, oh yeah, they were there recording.
Well, they could make it so you have to pay, but it's free if you put in all the info.
They go. Like, it's just ask the artist, solve the problem.
Artists will do anything if it's free. Like, I got to pay 10. Oh, if I do this, it's free registration.
Yeah. I think there's loads of things to think about, like loads of things to make it easier, exactly as you say. Like all the things I have to do in my day-to-day life to verify things, like that could be a straightforward thing, like in the band. Is that verified?
It feels as alien as a tax return when you're 19, 18, 20.
Yeah.
Some folks 50. It doesn't end, but it feels like that. The idea of all of this stuff, even though not anymore, I'm quite into it and on top of it all, but the idea of it used to make me feel sick, like tax returns.
Yeah.
Just.
No, I felt the same way.
Tax returns have gotten better.
But then here are all
That's
these
the
artists,
thing.
let's go tax returns, who get people to do their tax returns, and they're losing millions because people skim, and it's like people need to be far more self-reliant.
Yeah.
It's why there's loads of aspects to trying to solve it. And I think that's why people get frustrated with the unattributable revenue issue, because they just want it, can you just fix it? Like, but it's actually loads of different aspects to fixing it, like making things easier, education, awareness, government frameworks, a stronger understanding of copyright, like, opportunities of technology, whether it's blockchain or just normal technologies that we've already got. Like, it is a lot of aspects to it. But it's why we try and collaborate with everyone. Like, forever having meetings with people all over the world to come together to try and collaborate on their different areas. Like, some person it described it like it's like doing a 5,000-piece jigsaw all at the same time. You sort of can't do it. So some person's working on the edges, some person's concentrating on the tree bit, another person's only doing the sky. But how do those parts join up? Like that's why I don't feel it's so awful anymore. I used to think, oh, it's just awful. And now I just think, no, there's loads of people who are trying to fix it around the world. Loads of people who are really driven to fix it. Yeah. And it's just being interoperable and cooperative, with those people.
Cooperative is the key word there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of where we landed. There are kind of governance questions around this, about governance where it's self-governance, and how do you motivate all these different pieces of the jigsaw puzzle to come together. So I'm going to throw it open to the audience to see if there's questions, or even from online. Because, I think there might be a roving mic. Hang on one sec.
Hi. Which Australian organisations do you think we should be turning to try and sort this out for us? Who's got the obligation, if anyone?
Do you want to answer that question? I can say that I think, that the collecting societies should definitely be paying a lot of attention to it. And just little things like making it easy for people to have their metadata after they've entered it, to be able to still, you can enter it into a system, but to be able to keep that, it's something Marita pointed out to me, I think is really useful, so that then you can take it to the next person that needs it, right? And a lot of the private platforms out there are not necessarily incentivized for that either, as in it's not in their interests to make it easy for you to be able to take all the metadata that you've entered to the next player. But then in Australia, we have things like the data rights, where you if you can, by law now, you have to be able to access your banking data and take it to a different provider or fintech or whomever. So that should just be a given, in my opinion. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think some of the organisations could do better with their technology, so things were easier. At least there wouldn't be manual error in names and utilising authentication. I mean, I only say this because we interviewed all around the world. So we did like technology audits of everyone we interviewed. So all the technologies they use and all the collection societies they interface with. So I got to know a lot how the technology works with collection societies around the world. So there is some are doing a good job here, but there is some room for improvement as well.
Yeah, at least they're not for profits in Australia. We have that in our favour.
Yeah, unlike America, where it's like, competitive and with the collection societies, they're not for profits. But yeah, PPL does an amazing job in the UK, like really amazing on the performance side, like PPCA equivalent. And then there's, AIR here is like good at talking about artist rights and things like that. But yeah, I was working with some RMIT students going through this process, what Invoke went through with research, and they did an audit of the aggregators like DistroKid and CD Baby things. They did a audit of if they even mention metadata, and some are really great at it, and some don't mention it at all, except one bit in the FAQs when it said, can I submit my own metadata? And it said, no, don't, we'll strip it out anyway, so don't worry about it. Like, it's just, oh, great. Like, and you don't get a receipt. You don't get a metadata receipt once you've submitted your work. Like, and that's of value. You've submitted it. Could you not get a receipt? Like, could you not have your data to keep it? And that's that data sovereignty thing. I think you were saying something. It's like having those rights over your data. Like it is your data sovereignty. There's more awareness around your privacy and data sovereignty. And this is a descriptor of your works.
Thank you.
I've got a question from the chat here online. So this is from Wong Siwei. Wong says, could you please describe the roles, chain of aggregator, distributor, publisher, and DSP?
So an aggregator is like a platform that delivers to a digital service provider. So a digital service provider is like Spotify and Apple, and an aggregator delivers to them. And a distributor is sort of like an aggregator, but with add-ons. So it's a bit blurry now with distributors and aggregators, because some aggregators can also offer you a distribution package, and a distributor could be maybe a straight delivery thing. Or distributors subcontract out their digital delivery to aggregators. But there's also like B2B aggregators or public-facing aggregators. But they're basically platforms to deliver to a digital service provider. The publisher is on the other side, which is your composition. So your relationship with your publisher will be generally more long-term as an artist, because they're working with you as a songwriter. So your recorded work, you might go through a few record labels, or you might be with a record label for a long time, but a publisher is more about you as a songwriter, and it also puts you together with other collaborators, and it generates the ISWC. The record label generates the ISRC. And those two things need to be linked, and currently they're not. Like at a minimum, they need to be linked.
Can I just take it back a step for people who aren't on that level of understanding this? So when you say WC, we're talking writer, R, we're talking recording. And there's a big split between being a writer and a recording. So if I record something at my house, I own the recording. If I record something at Black Curtain Studios, Black Curtain own the recording, because I did it in their space, unless I pay for the recording. Now it's mine. No? Not necessarily?
No.
Okay.
Yeah,
for them.
either you or your record label own the recording, or it's licensed to you. The studios.
No, I mean if the studio is the label's studio.
Yeah. Well, if whoever paid for the recording
Owns.
Owns it, unless it's a license deal.
Yeah, so if I pay for the recording in the space, it's mine. And a lot of artists don't realize, we're in the studio, the label's paying for it. All right, and then back to aggregator and distributor. So an aggregator might be, for example, a DistroKid, a Dido, a Fugue, a Xelon. And then the distributor is if, let's say, Dido have a distribution, it means we're distributing it out and making an effort to get it to people for you versus here's a space that exists. It's kind of the difference. It's like, here's where you can put sandwiches. Cool. We're going to distribute them out for you. We'll actually take them to places and try and get people to eat them. So for the person at home, that's kind of the difference. But it doesn't mean they'll eat them.
So they were once... so distributors... Distributors would have been the people getting the CDs into Virgin Megastore or whatever once upon a time, right?
It was simpler when it was physical because you knew they were distributing it. Yeah. But it's like when the internet first was kicking off, because we started our record label in 2005, and I remember they were trying to get us to sign our digital rights of distribution the same percentage as our physical. But I'm like, but the internet is distributed. Like, it is distributed. Like, why are you taking the same percentage? Because there's no envelopes, there's no trucks. Like, the internet is distributed. But
yeah, that's crazy.
It's still a thing today when you work with some labels and they want the distribution percentage, and they'll include breakages on digital. Because when you sell CDs and vinyl, there's breakages, so they allow for it. But they're like breakages too, but digital breakages, what, is someone's internet going down? You know.
The music industry is funny that way. It's sort of historically sort of funny, but
exploitative is the word.
It does need a bit of sorting out in that area. Hopefully that answers the question.
Could I have a follow-up question to that as well? Because I've run into a few cases where organizations like Sound Exchange in the US reach out to people saying you have reached this amount of revenue with us and we are inviting you to register because they've passed that threshold, but then people don't normally realize that they have revenue there sitting for them to collect. So are there any revenue resources, like metadata related revenue resources that are often overlooked that you would recommend musicians to look into?
I've heard about that too. I mean, people we've interviewed have had that experience too, that they just spent half an hour sitting there and came out with $50,000, just from tracking, just money on the floor. That was Kevin describing it like that. There's lots of initiatives around now that, I showed those red lines drifting off. There are a lot of initiatives now that are about collecting those red lines up. Like the damage is done, it's drifted off, let's try and collect it up. So it's looking up ones that suit you for the country you're in, but there are a lot of initiatives for that, because if they are digital revenues waiting, then they should be easy to collect. But I guess for your metadata, it's to make sure all your works are registered, to make sure all your works are registered accurately, and then to audit whoever you're working with, or audit yourself, try and do a reconciliation yourself on your works to try and track those down. But there should be those government initiatives with tax, how you can see if you've got leftover
superannuation. Yeah.
Why isn't that? Why couldn't that get funding? One of the things they're saying one of the recommendations from the UK thing was the unattributable revenue, instead of being redistributed into the industry, could be used to pay for some kind of mechanism like that actually searches for lost revenue.
Because the redistribution just goes to the overall, all the artists, based on who's doing the most to the least, right?
By label, though, not by artist.
Yeah.
So it goes to the three majors, basically.
Yeah.
So when Marida said before, some people are getting paid twice, they're people who are signed to the major labels, right? Or the labels themselves?
The labels themselves.
Oh,
like
okay,
it
so
doesn't,
not the people who are signed to the
no,
labels.
it just stops with the labels.
Right.
Because it's unattributable to them. I mean, like, who do they pay it to? They just take it in. They even have it called something different on the spreadsheet. I can't remember because it's not technically like immediate. It's like in arrears, or I can't remember what it's an accounting name. So it just comes in. It's just extra money from unattributable.
Fool's gold.
Yeah.
From all of us, fools.
Possibly got time for one more question, if there's any out there. No? Okay, well.
I'll ask a final question.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of talk of the unattributable income that can be a result of not having accurate metadata. Are there other advantages to having accurate metadata that aren't to do with unattributed income?
That aren't to.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, well, that on that first side, the recommendation algorithms, like, so that you can be searched for, you know, like you can, someone who listens to one piece of music might like your piece of music, so tagging, things like that. So, yeah, just, and whoever plays on the track, like in terms of credits, like it used to be that it was credits on physical and their liner notes, their credits for information for fan engagement, you know, so I mean, that's part of the analytics as well. Lost data is not only revenue, it's fan engagement. So if you go from one label to another, to a distributor, to something like all those analytics and fan engagement is also lost along with your revenue. So yeah, that's the other advantage.
That's what we were hearing from the people who are handling this metadata inside all these companies and agencies was it is, like, when it's done well, it is used for things like marketing and engagement. And it's also, of course, used for dispute resolution and for all of the kind of questions that come up when someone wants to use a song in a TV show or something like that. So it was legal officers that were using it. It was the accounting part of the company, and then it was the marketing part of the company. So it was just interesting seeing like who's using that metadata within these labels, because it gives you an idea of actually this is incredibly useful stuff, and it's useful in the future. And we also heard of a lot of companies who are kind of buying these back catalogs and then having to spend months and months and months literally with cardboard boxes trying to figure out who had rights on what song, because they'd taken this back catalogue. So now we have these digital systems in place. If you can get that right from the start, think of all the time that you're saving in the future for your future self.
Yeah. And rights ending reversion too. So often rights will just drift. They won't put an end date on a license period, so they'll just drift, and they won't come down off digital service providers. They'll just keep going. I mean, I've tried to take down records, like, because the contract ended, and some of them are still up there. It's like, take them down, and it just doesn't get taken down. So, I mean, that's one opportunity we looked at with smart contracts. Like, imagine if the contract ended at the exact date it was meant to end and reverted to you on the dot of midnight as an artist, so you didn't then need to go back manually to all these multiple points of entry to change the date, you know. So that's one opportunity of technology which would be absolutely amazing. And that may come from managers pushing, like when they sign their artists, like, yeah, we'll sign them, but we want like a smart enacted contract so rights revert on time, because drifting license periods was one special pain point for lots of labels we spoke to.
Do you ever thought about how artists should be storing their metadata beyond, having to, log into APRA or log into this to get their information? Is there a way they should be storing things?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's like a really, really interesting aspect to it. Like I had that line at the start, like all the action happens there, but there's not much recording going on. Like there's not much documenting of it going on. I mean, just even just a shared document, just a shared document with your band maybe is a good way to start, that you can like dot point working on an album. I used to do it with a band. We worked with a Japanese band, like, because I wanted them to sign off on spellings, because it was in Japanese language. So I just shared a Google document with them. And that way I knew it was signed off, and it was verified as signed off, even though it was just it was not super techy or anything. It was just a shared document. But it was a good way to start that conversation at the point of the song, at the idea of the song, rather than it only being something you think about at the point of a commercial recording.
We should wrap up, but thank you both for these incredible insights, actually. I hope it was useful to other people here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.